Well, hello there. It is good to see you again, and welcome back to Advance Your Wealth with Homer Smith. I am your host and moderator, Ryan Ruff. It's good to be back with you all today. And as always, I'm joined by our star of the show, and that's Homer Smith, of course, private wealth advisor. And we're going to be jumping into yet another wealth management related topic, as we typically do here on the show. And to frame things up, look, we all have the standard insurance that helps protect, us and our finances, like auto insurance or homeowners insurance. But are those policies really enough to safeguard your assets if you're faced with, let's say, an extremely big claim against you? So, today we're going to be taking a closer look at this idea of a personal umbrella insurance policy and discovering just how important it is in the first place if you have significant assets at your disposal. Ultimately, having you ask the question to yourself is, do I need a personal umbrella policy? That's really the heart of today's conversation. But first, before we dive any deeper into it, let's go ahead and bring Homer out and say hi. Homer, it's good to see you today. How you doing, sir?
Doing well. How are you?
Good as always. And Homer, I understand we've got a special guest joining us here on the show today, Miss Jennifer Alimonda, Director of Private Client Solutions over at Sterling Risk. Homer, I understand you obviously have a relationship with Jennifer, and you've gone through some different dealings. We're obviously bringing her in as kind of that P&L or PNC firm that's really known on a national level to kind of get her insights into the matter. But Homer, I'd love if you could frame things up to our audience and introduce us to Jennifer, if you will.
Yeah, I think it's a perfect topic because as we do our family office reviews or our second opinion reviews for clients, this is one of the areas that almost every time we find that there's holes or opportunities to improve the protection that our coverages that our clients have. And to be honest, I'd say we're knowledgeable enough to be dangerous on this topic. I can recognize if there's an immediate, major gap there, but I'm not an expert on all the little details that are going to make the difference for the client. So it's really important for us that we partner with, really great experts from around the country, depending on what area of need it is for our clients. And over the last number of months, we've had the opportunity to meet Jennifer and her team at Sterling Risk and have been really impressed with what they've been able to do for our clients that have had those reviews, and excited to bring her expertise onto the show today to talk about this subject.
I'm Jennifer Alimonda, Director of Private Client Solutions over at Sterling Risk. Thank you, Homer, for inviting me onto the show today. I'm excited to speak to you and the audience regarding, probably one of the most important policies there is in the insurance industry overall is an umbrella policy.
So before we dive in on umbrella specifically, maybe just give a little bit about your background and kind of how you got into this world and the kind of work that you do for clients in general.
Sure, absolutely. So I've been at Sterling Risk for 8 years. I run our personal lines division here. We have, a strong focus in the high net worth space. And, I work with the team here at Sterling to provide tailored programs for affluent families and individuals. So we work with a lot of advisors, and working with the advisors, we would sit there and assess their assets and their needs to protect the assets that they have, and we really see what's going to be the best fit for them for their lifestyle, and to protect any exposures that they have. And working with you and some other wealth advisors, we are able to work together and partner up to put together a very tailored program for the client.
Great. All right. Well, we're going to dive into umbrella insurance in pretty deep detail today. I'm sure we'll cover how it relates to other coverages like they have, like their home and auto as well along the way. But before we dive into that, just what is umbrella insurance in general? What is this important factor that clients need to be considering as a part of their liability protection?
Sorry, I lost signal over here. I apologize. So with regards to in an umbrella policy, it's not a primary liability policy. A lot of people look at it as an excess liability policy. Um, your primary liability lies with any type of property insurance you have if you own a home, or even simple as renting, a location. There's your primary liability for your property. And then you also have your auto liability. So your auto policy carries primary liability limits. If you own a boat, your watercraft policy will carry those primary limits. Then you also have, the umbrella policy will sit over all those limits and provide you excess coverage. So your primary will, usually max out. Most likely at a million. And then you have the umbrella policy that will cover you over the million. So if there's ever a loss in with with a property, a boat, or an automobile, and those primary limits are exhausted, you have your excess limits, otherwise known as the umbrella limits, to pick up.
Great. So, give us some examples. I'm sure you've seen a lot in your career where an umbrella policy really comes into play. What do some of those large claims look like that would go over the top of your typical liability limits?
So I think today more than ever, we're seeing the umbrella policies getting pierced. Liability limits are, liability is getting settlements are at an all-time high. So the umbrella policies are getting pierced. Um, a, a few examples would be if you're a homeowner and you're entertaining and somebody slips and falls on the stoop outside, and now they hurt themselves. They get rushed, they go to the hospital. You're going to have coverage there for them to, get care that they need. Now they have long-term damage. Now they broke their arm and now they have to go to therapy and they can't move their arm. Then the liability is going to, now they can't, now they can't work and now they need to get loss of wages. So your liability would be covered underneath the primary liability limits of the homeowner's policy. And the once that's exhausted, then afterwards you have your umbrella policy that would come in and kick in. So you get sued for $1 million. Let's say we'll get sued for $1 million. Maybe you only carry $300,000 in liability on the homeowner's policy. You have the umbrella policy that will cover you to protect you, where you don't have to go into your pockets to release those funds. Then you have an automobile accident that occurs. You're driving, you hit somebody, the other party is injured, they can't work, they need surgery, your liability limits are exhausted on the auto policy, and now you have the umbrella policy that would help you. So that's going to kick in. So you get sued for $1 million there, and now you only have 100, we'll say 250,000 on the automobile policy. Now you have the umbrella policy that will protect you. You're operating your boat, you get into a boating accident. You also have so after like your $500,000, we would say, was exhausted there, you get sued for $2 million. You have your umbrella policy that's going to protect you there. And with that, the umbrella policy also covers usually you for like any type of attorney fees are occurred through this process. So it really takes care of everything from bonnet to ends to the policy limits.
Well, that's great. I mean,
Mm.
I know it's super unlikely, but kind of the example we use with clients a lot to get them to really understand the risk is if, for whatever town they're in, we ask them, like, think about the most expensive private school in your area. And let's say you're just driving down the road and purely by accident, you happen to hit that bus. And whether or not it's your fault and whether or not, how injured everybody on the bus might be, you're probably getting 25 lawsuits, from that incident. I know it's super unlikely that that would occur, but that's, where that excess umbrella policy is going to be needed because you're going to exhaust your regular limits pretty quickly. So I know you mentioned already the typical limits you see when you are reviewing policies for the first time. So if someone like me comes along and says, okay, our client would like you to review their coverages, where do you see their limits typically being at on their base coverages, their home auto, and what risks or gaps do you most often find in reviewing that compared to their umbrella insurance?
Um, so I think it varies really on the type of the client. So, usually for an affluent individual or family, I usually see a million on the primary for a homeowner's policy. That's probably the most common. However, you probably could go as low as 300,000 on an homeowner's policy. I always like to max out at a million. The cost usually to go from 300,000 to a million is not, is minimum. I mean, it could be only $100 sometimes, depending on the carrier. So I think it's always nice to max out. And when it comes to the auto, that's the tricky part, because if you on your umbrella policy, in order for the umbrella policy to really kick in, you would see you need to carry specific underlying limits. So usually they'll say for your property insurance, you need to carry a minimum of 300,000. And then when it comes to auto, you usually need to carry a minimum of 250,000, 500,000, which is two split limits for bodily injury. And then you also need to carry at least $100,000 in property damage. A lot of times, that is what the most common that we see. However, there's plenty of times when we're doing reviews where we're not seeing that, and we see lower limits than that. If you carry a lower limit than that and you have an umbrella policy, what will happen is if you get into an accident and the liability limits are exhausted and you need that umbrella policy, when there's a gap in coverage, you're responsible for that gap. So if you have a $300,000 gap, that's coming out of your pocket. You need to make sure you carry the proper limits in order for the umbrella policy to kick in.
Perfect. So, based on this, you know, who do you think, I guess, has to be particularly concerned with this, or given what you mentioned at the start, that you're seeing a particularly large amount of umbrella policies now being, kind of pierced. Is this a risk that people should be really concerned about if they've got significant assets?
Absolutely. Nobody wants to touch what they've worked so hard for, their financial, their financials, their assets, their property that they've, accumulated, that everything they've built, they want to leave to their children, their grandchildren. They don't want to have to, go into those assets to pay out on a loss. And it's really just as simple as doing the proper reviews at a renewal to make sure that the client is carrying the proper limits. A lot of things happen during the policy period. So I think it's really important that people, brokers and agents do the reviews to make sure that the proper coverages are in place.
And what are some of the things, it's not just the level of wealth, although I think that's obviously a big factor. The more, money you have, the bigger target you might have on your back. But what are some of the other factors that might come along with that wealth that you typically see that increase the risk, where someone should consider, making sure they've got an adequate amount of umbrella insurance in place?
I think it really just gets based on lifestyle. I think that's probably the most important thing when it comes to carrying the proper umbrella limits. So I give this scenario a lot, and you probably have heard it. And I think it's just really easy for a lot of people to understand. So you could have two people, both worth, $25 million. And, one person just lives in an apartment in the city and really doesn't, sometimes rents a vehicle, doesn't have a car, doesn't travel much. They don't, maybe own a little bit of art and maybe two pieces of jewelry. Then you have another person who's worth 25 million, who owns two homes, owns a boat, has a Ferrari, has a Bentley and a Rolls Royce, and has a few kids, and they travel a lot. That lifestyle is probably a little bit more risky, so it's even more important for that person to probably carry the higher limits up to 25 million. So I think when we're looking to assess the proper personal umbrella limits, I think it's really important working with a risk advisor such as yourself to really understand what their financial portfolio looks like,
Yeah.
and then also talking to them and understanding what their lifestyle is. So based on those two factors is two good ways to really determine the proper umbrella limits.
Perfect. So are there aspects of umbrella policies or benefits that these policies have that are often overlooked or people don't realize are there, other than just the kind of the overriding liability limits above your home and auto policies?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think an umbrella policy, I mean, there's a lot of different things a lot of the carriers we work with, I think we work with affluent, insurance companies. So they really focus on that high net worth space. So the policy contracts are very broad. So it does provide worldwide coverage. So I think that's another thing that's important, especially you have a family that travels a lot. I think it's great to understand, like, they're traveling, they're overseas, something happens while they're traveling, somebody tripped and fell in their luggage and is blaming them and causing, and now raising a suit based on that because they broke their they broke their ankle doing that. So I think it's really important to understand like these policies are worldwide, so they'll cover them anywhere in the world. I think it's also important that some of these policies, if they afford other coverages, not just not excess personal liability limits. You also have, if you employ domestic employees, a lot of these policies, they'll cover employment practice liability coverage. That's something that could be added on, and that will just cover you if you ever was faced with a lawsuit due to a domestic employee suing you for sexual harassment, wrongful termination, defamation of character. And then there's, if you sit on any boards, not-for-profit boards, there's directors and officers coverage for non-fiduciary responsibilities. So, I mean, those are some other enhancements on a lot of these policies that they offer. And again, that would just be something based on understanding the lifestyle and the hobbies and needs of the family that we're working with. And based on that, we would figure out if we need to add these coverages.
I think that's really important because that's a lot of other areas that these can cover, and obviously often these clients we're working with have a lots of those other activities, and to know that for a pretty reasonable cost that umbrella insurance comes with, that it can have pretty wide ranging protections. I think that's critical. Um, in your opinion, in your experience, is there a particular amount of umbrella protection that people should be considering if they have sizable assets? Is there like a rule of thumb that you guys go with?
Typically no. I mean, I think it really just depends on what they, what they own, if how many properties they own, how many boats do they own, how many high performance vehicles they own, what's their lifestyle like. I think that's the most important thing because, we're in a business, we don't want to, we're not overselling in any way. We just want to make sure that the right coverage is in place. So I think again, like understanding their net worth and understanding their lifestyle, usually we work together and we would determine what's the proper limits for the umbrella. I think, I mean, just depending on our client base, I mean, I really don't see anybody just in our agency here. I'm going to say that we really don't see anything less than 5 million, but I think it's an average of that 10 to 25 is a lot more than what we see here.
Yeah.
Again, that's not for everybody, but we really just we don't see anything below 5.
Yeah, and our rule of thumb, obviously, we rely on experts like you, but as a general talking point for a lot of our clients, obviously the risk factors that really matter, like to your point, is up to your net worth. You should consider having up to your net worth about 20 million in coverage.
Mhm.
And once you get about 20 million, obviously it's going to be about your risk factors even more so. But again, not every client needs that much based on that net worth. But I think that's kind of what we start them with in the conversation, and then obviously we turn it over to experts like you to really dial it in.
Mhm.
Um, so I know cost is a big factor. We kind of mentioned that already, but what are the factors that influence the cost and the level of premiums for policies like umbrella policies?
It depends. So it's covering, really depends on how much we're looking to insure. So how many, what is the umbrella sitting over? So, you could have two people both with a $10 million limit, and one person could be paying, you know, $2,500 because it's only covering maybe one location. And then you could have another person who's probably going to be paying about $7,500 because they own probably 3 or 4 properties. They probably have 5 or 6 vehicles. They probably own a boat. So it really just kind of depends on what we're tacking on as the underlying on the policy. So that's usually how the rate factor is. And it also, we also take a look at overall, we'll run like what we call like a loss run, which, kind of runs claims. So it really also depends on, if there's a lot of claim frequency or not. And that rate gets factored in as well.
Oh, perfect. I mean, it seems like a no-brainer. Just get as much umbrella coverage as you possibly can. You can then kind of do whatever you want, and you're protected. But we know that's not really the case. So, while these types of policies can safeguard your assets to a certain extent and make our clients less attractive targets for frivolous lawsuits, things like that, what do they not cover? What are the limits of a policy like this?
So, I mean, we can go up to 100 million with our carriers. So we could go as high as that. Um, I typically don't see that. The highest we usually do is 50 million. Have I gotten rates for that? Yes, but with reinsurance costs, I mean, it gets very costly. It can be very expensive. So, usually the common number is usually that, 10 to 25 we see a lot of here. And, and rate factors, like I said, it varies by with the carriers, which market we're using, where where the locations are, if everything is it inside the US, outside the US, New York, Florida, California. So all that stuff is like kind of factored in there. Like I
So
said,
asking
vehicles.
so asking it a different way. So that's like total coverage limit, which is great because we actually do have clients that have seen significant policies like that. Another way I'm thinking about it is what activities can the client do where it wouldn't be covered by these limits? What could unwind or prevent them from being able to utilize this kind of coverage?
Um, so I mean, it's got a little difficult for me to answer because it's more like a claims question. But I will say that the policy is it's very broad. These umbrella policies, and especially with the carriers that we work with. I don't see too many exclusions. Just trying to think of a scenario where I saw, where I found that there was an exclusion. I mean, it, a lot of people, they need to understand needs to cover you personally. So if you're operating a business and you're sued, you get pulled into a lawsuit with your business, which I have seen before, where somebody got pulled into a lawsuit, like a defamation of character, and it's regarding their business. And it was declined, because they need to make sure they carry, the proper umbrella limits for their business. This is just for personal use only. So I think that's good to understand. Also, it covers for you and any household members. So anybody that's, still, let's say, a family member, like a brother or sister, and they don't reside with you or live with you, I've seen that coverage is declined for them. So you need to make sure that it's just for that household only. Um, I'm just trying to think of another scenario. I
One thing
mean,
that, and maybe you could probably provide more details on this, but I know that there's certain limits, like from if you intentionally criminally do something that might end up in an injury to somebody else. Those are areas that potentially it may not.
yeah, those are. I've seen where there's a lot of like litigation back and forth, because it's not, meant for that stuff. An intent, in like like a criminal intent, we would say, that's not, there's no coverage there for that. Or like, or committing fraud in any way, like there's no coverage for that. But really it's there for, slander, um, you know, defamation of character, and any type of, I'm just trying to think, any type of, physical injuries, that are caused by, you or a family member, like non-intentionally. We would say, don't go and beat up people.
Yeah,
We're not promoting that.
yeah.
So, those would be some good ways to kind of, understand what's covered and not covered.
Great. Well, it's kind of the last of my main questions. I guess any final comments or wrap up that you'd like to throw in terms of what you think is important for people to consider when it comes to their overall coverage.
I think I think this just goes overall with your insurance, and, it definitely umbrella policies. Like we said when we started this conversation, I see claims on a daily basis. We have a very large, claims team here, and I don't handle claims personally, but I am notified when they're going on, especially when the umbrellas get pierced. I am made aware of it by our chief of claims. And I think that, claims are settling at an all-time high. We see commercials on a daily basis. You were in an automobile accident, contact us and our firm will get you the right amount that's deserved. And it could be as simple as, you're stopped at a red light and you just rear-ended somebody, and now all of a sudden you're getting hit with a $2 million lawsuit.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that those lawsuits always settle. But again, it's nice to know that you have the coverage there where you're not tapping into your pocket. So I think it's really, really important to take the time and sit with your broker and really review on what exactly you have. These policies we bind them up sometimes, just even personally being, we own insurance, we own our own insurance personally. So, we issue a policy and we kind of leave it and it just automatically renews each year and we're not taking a look at it. So I think it's really important if your broker's not reaching out to you to reach out to your broker, have the conversation. Your lifestyle changes every single year. You might have came into some family wealth, you might have bought a few properties. I think it's really important to kind of assess everything that you have to make sure those umbrella limits are the right limits for you. And then the other thing is, making sure you have the right underlying coverage. So I think that's very important, like the first thing that we touched on. We see it on a daily basis, doing reviews on other policies or new clients of ours where there is a gap in coverage. They're not carrying the proper liability limits on an automobile policy or their homeowners policy. And now there'll be a gap in coverage where the umbrella policy will not kick in. So I think it's really important to take the time and always review what you have.
All right. Well, that's been great. This has been very educational and informational. I really appreciate it, Jennifer, for joining the show today, and looking forward
Yeah.
to continuing to work with you and your team, and seeing all the great value you've been providing to our clients. So appreciate your time today.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me, and we'll talk soon.
Fantastic, guys. And hey, look, we're going to take one final moment, though. Homer, for anybody in our audience today that's intrigued by this idea of the personal umbrella policy, or maybe they just have a few extra questions that they'd love to bounce off you and your team, and maybe by way of you and your team, also chat with Jennifer and her team, what would be the best way, Homer, that they could reach out and get some clarity and just maybe open up a dialogue with you guys?
Yeah, great question. I think it's this conversation really for us is a part of a bigger asset protection conversation. So it's not just around your insurance, your auto, your home, your umbrella, but really it's about this bigger idea of making you a less attractive target for fraudsters, frivolous lawsuits, creditors, things of this nature. And so whether it's making you more anonymous in just your everyday dealings and work environment, or for your business, or whether it's again just making sure you have the right kinds of liability protection in place. I think it's important that on a regular basis, at least annually, that you review all of the coverages you have and just make sure you have the right coverage in place. So for as always, if you have any questions on this particular topic or are looking for a bigger overall review of your financial situation, we're happy to have you reach out to our team at Convergent Wealth, and we'd be happy to go through a full review of your overall situation, or just this particular issue around asset protection.
Fantastic. Well, look, Homer and Jennifer, appreciate you both stopping by and being with us today. And of course, finally, for our audience, we also appreciate you guys being with us here today on the show. If you took anything away from today's discussion, you benefited from it in any way, shape, or form, we'll go ahead and hit that subscribe button then on whichever platform you checked us out on today. That way, you never miss out on any future conversations between Homer, myself, and any one of our esteemed guests that we bring in to dive into these complex wealth management related discussions, because that's what we tackle here, and we'd hate to have you miss out on any of those down the road. Before Homer, for Jennifer, I'm Ryan. We're going to go ahead and say so long now, but we appreciate you stopping by and being with us on Advance Your Wealth.